At Trafalgar, in October 1805, 27 British warships fired something in the range of 50,000 cannon shots over 5 hours of battle. When the gun smoke finally cleared, not one British ship had been sunk by enemy fire. That is the paradox sitting at the center of 400 years of naval warfare. The cannon was the most feared weapon on the planet, the thing that shaped every fleet, every tactic, and every empire. And it almost never actually sank ships. So how did it decide battles? The answer is hiding in a place almost no one looks. The 90 seconds between one shot and the next. Today we are going inside the gun deck, the physics, the doctrine, and the very human cost of the weapon that built the age of sail. That question has a precise answer, and it lives inside a single number almost never mentioned in the history books. One that also explains why the cannon's greatest strength became the very reason navies abandoned it almost overnight.
That image, it turns out, was largely invented after the fact by painters who never smelled powder smoke and novelists who needed drama that the historical records stubbornly refused to supply. That paradox becomes easier to understand once you step below decks and meet the gun itself. The real target was never the ship. It was the men standing at the guns. Kill or break the crews serving the gun deck, and the vessel surrenders intact, a floating prize worth a fortune in prize money, serviceable timber, and salvageable ordnance. Wreckage at the bottom of the channel is worth nothing to anyone. That single distinction shaped every decision that followed, from the drawing boards of royal dockyards to the standing orders issued on the morning of battle. If you want to keep going, the ammunition types alone will change how you picture these battles. Hit subscribe, so the next part lands in your feed.
The gun itself starts with a pit in the ground. Molten iron poured into a clay mold, cooled for days, then bored out from solid, not cast hollow, because hollow casting trapped air pockets that could turn the breach into a grenade on the first shot. Even solid cast guns occasionally burst. Foundry records from the period describe crews who survived the broadside only to lose men to their own piece splitting at the reinforce. A 32-pounder long gun was a 3-ton iron instrument, requiring a crew of 6 to 8 men working in precise sequence, sponging the bore, ramming the cartridge, seating the shot, priming the vent. Run out, aim, fire, then begin again. That 90-second cycle was the heartbeat of the gun deck, and everything about how these men were trained, positioned, and driven was built around sustaining it.
Effective range sat somewhere between 200 and 400 yards. By the standards of a land artillery officer, that is practically hand-to-hand distance. And that absurdly short reach is the engine that drove every tactical decision that follows. So how did admirals actually measure that firepower at a glance? They counted guns, and Britain's Royal Navy had a formal system for it, 6 tiers from smallest to largest. A 6th-rate vessel carried up to 28 guns, fast and light, useful for scouting and convoy escort. A 4th-rate sat in the middle, with 50 to 66 guns, powerful enough to fight, but by the Napoleonic era largely squeezed out of the line. First-rates, the flagships, mounted 100 guns or more across 3 full gun decks. At Trafalgar, Victory fired that broadside into the stern of the Bucentaure at near point-blank range, a single pass that dismounted 20 guns and killed or wounded almost 400 men. Before Trafalgar, both admiralties ran exactly that calculation, and the arithmetic, for once, pointed in Britain's favor. What was actually loaded into the gun, and where exactly crews were ordered to point it, both varied sharply by nation. And the gap between those two choices decided who lived. Round shot, chain shot, or grape shot? Which do you think caused the most casualties in a broadside exchange? Guess before we get there. That gap between nations, one side shooting to kill crew, the other shooting to dismast, is exactly the kind of choice the Carronade made unavoidable. That rhythm, however, assumed a particular kind of weapon, and by the 1770s, a radical alternative was already being cast at the Carron Ironworks in Falkirk, Scotland. Sailors called it the Smasher. Where a long gun stretched 5 feet or more down the deck, the Carronade was stubby, almost comical, barely 2 feet of barrel on a sliding recoil carriage rather than a wheeled truck. It weighed a fraction of what it replaced, and 2 or 3 men could serve it where a long gun of comparable shot weight needed a dozen. That trade shaped how captains fought. Close the range, absorb the risk of approach, and the Carronade turned a frigate's gun deck into something a ship of the line had to respect. When USS Constitution closed hard on HMS Guerriere in August 1812, her carronades at that range tore the British frigate's hull and crew apart in under 30 minutes, and Guerriere struck her colours with her mizzenmast already gone. The catch? Drift even 200 yards beyond that lethal window, and the carronade was nearly harmless. What went into the barrel mattered as much as the gun itself. But the gun was only as effective as the ammunition fed into it, and the choice of shot was itself a tactical decision. Chain shot and bar shot served a different purpose entirely. Rather than punching through hulls, they were designed to shred the rigging, halyards, shrouds, stays, and bring down masts, crippling an enemy's ability to maneuver or flee before the real killing began. But before any of that firepower could be brought to bear, a crew had to survive long enough to use it, and that meant understanding exactly what the enemy was trying to do to them. The British tended to load for the hull and crew. The French and Spanish aimed high, targeting rigging and spars. That doctrinal split, crew or canvas, is where the real argument begins. That doctrinal split runs deeper than ammunition choice. It was a philosophy about what a naval battle actually is. That choice of target was deliberate doctrine, and it split the great navies of the age into 2 opposing philosophies, each convinced the other was wrong. A ship that cannot chase you cannot hurt you. And that logic shaped everything about how French and Spanish captains chose to fight. The British logic was self-reinforcing. Each volley that thinned an enemy crews slowed the reply, bought more time to reload, and made the next broadside more devastating still. The French approach depended on distance, and distance was exactly what a closing enemy refused to grant. At that proximity, elevation became an abstraction. The masts were already splintered, the sails already shredded, and the real killing had only just begun. Under return fire, with the deck shaking and the man beside you missing his hands, the average British crew had roughly 90 seconds to do it all again. That number, 90 seconds, is what decided empires. Subscribe so you don't miss what came next when the iron started flying back. You are the admiral. Aim for the hull or aim for the rigging? Which do you order? 90 seconds. Let's actually live inside that number for a moment. The Royal Navy's answer was repetition so relentless it became reflex. Crews drilled until the sequence ran not from thought, but from muscle memory. Each man moving to his station without being told. Hands finding the rammer or the ladle in the dark, and the smoke as naturally as they found a rope. And they achieved it through obsessive, relentless repetition, on land, in harbor, in Atlantic swells, until the hands moved without the brain. The result, in genuine action, was 2 to 3 broadsides every 5 minutes. Franco-Spanish crews, their gunners years out of practice after long blockades kept their fleets bottled in port, managed closer to 1. Same iron, same powder, same hull dimensions. The only variable was 6 exhausted men who had done this 10,000 times before in the dark. 1 broadside answered with 2. That arithmetic, repeated across an entire line of battle for 5 hours, is not a tactical advantage. It is an execution. Picture the gun deck as the paintings show it. Clean light through open ports. Men posed in purposeful attitudes, the cannon gleaming. Now, forget all of it. After the first exchange, the deck disappeared into sulfur smoke so thick that crews at adjacent guns became shadows. Captains learned fast that shouting was useless. A broadside discharge produced concussive pressure that left ears ringing for minutes, sometimes permanently. Orders moved by hand signal, passed man to man down the line. The human cost of that doctrine played out in ways nobody had fully anticipated. When an enemy shot struck the hull, the oak itself exploded inward, shards the size of a forearm driven at roughly the speed of the ball that launched them, scything across the deck. The majority of wounds recorded after Trafalgar were splinter wounds, not iron. A man could watch the ball pass clean overhead and then be opened up by a plank from his own ship.
The men who kept that 90-second reload cycle running, through smoke blindness, through concussion, through the sound of the man beside them going down, were not operating a weapon. They were the weapon. The cannon was just the part that got painted. What drove every captain toward that terrifying geometry was the gun itself. Specifically, what it could not do. Smoothbore accuracy collapsed with distance. The culprit was windage. To load a cannon at all, the ball had to be slightly smaller than the bore, typically by around 1/10 of an inch or more. That gap was not a flaw, it was a physical necessity. But it meant every ball rattled slightly as it left the barrel, and that tiny wobble compounded over range into a spread wide enough to miss a ship entirely at 500 yards. Elevation was set by a wooden wedge called a quoin, tapped under the breech by hand. No graduated scale, no optics, no repeatable reference. One rough sea swell between aiming and firing, and the shot went into the water or the sky. At Trafalgar, Nelson's weather column made that logic brutally concrete. Sailing bow on into the Franco-Spanish line, his ships could not fire a single gun in reply as they approached, yet they absorbed the punishment and kept coming, knowing that the moment they broke through, they could rake at point-blank range and the mathematics would swing violently in their favor. The range problem didn't just shape tactics, it built them from the keel up. The range problem didn't just shape tactics, it determined the shape of the entire fleet. That geometry had a name, the line of battle, and understanding it begins with the gun deck itself. Below the waterline of ceremony, an entire command structure took shape. 3 divisions, van, center, rear, required 3 commanders, which is precisely where the ranks of Rear Admiral, Vice Admiral, and Admiral originated, not from tradition, but from tactical necessity. Signal codes, fleet maneuver theory, the entire choreography of 18th century naval warfare, all of it written by a gun that couldn't rotate more than a few degrees from the beam. That calculus played out differently depending on which flag flew at the stern. Which surprised you more, that cannon fire almost never sank ships, or that Britain's secret weapon was basically just faster reloading? But those diverging choices converged into a single, decisive test off Cape Trafalgar in October 1805. 33 ships against 27, 5 hours, and 22 prizes taken by the side that broke every rule. The arithmetic of how that happened is stranger than the legend.
That vulnerability was the price Nelson had calculated he could afford to pay. Once Victory finally crashed into the line, her bowsprit almost locking with the Bucentaure's rigging, the geometry inverted entirely, and it was the French who found their gunnery suddenly, catastrophically useless at point-blank range. Multiply that gap across dozens of guns and 5 hours of continuous engagement, and the cumulative weight of iron becomes almost impossible to withstand. That arithmetic paid off in full. 22 ships of the combined fleet struck their colors or were taken. The British lost not one to enemy gunfire. 300 minutes of superior reload speed, applied at scale, settled the account. The men who survived Trafalgar had no way of knowing they'd just witnessed the peak of something, not the continuation of it. 57 years later, on the James River in Virginia, the entire logic collapsed in a single afternoon. March 8, 1862. CSS Virginia, an ironclad built over the hull of a scuttled Union frigate, steams into Hampton Roads and tears apart 3 wooden Union warships in hours. Cannonballs that would have swept a gun deck clean simply punch into oak and splinter everything alive. The old equation holds, one last time. What happened at Hampton Roads in March 1862 made that 90-second heartbeat suddenly irrelevant. 4 centuries of cannon development, the bore calculations, the powder charges, the reload drills, the entire line of battle doctrine had been built around one assumption, that the target was wood. Remove the wood, and the cannonball becomes a noise. Rifled breech-loaders, accurate past a mile, were already waiting. The smoothbore's rain didn't fade. It bounced off a hull and stopped. So here is what 50,000 rounds at Trafalgar actually tell us. The side that killed crews faster won, and that calculus shaped everything that followed. How captains maneuvered for position, how surgeons braced below decks, and how quickly a stricken ship might strike its colors. That tempo was built in peacetime, not battle, and it translated under fire into something the enemy could rarely match. A British crew could fire 3 broadsides in the time a French or Spanish crew managed 2, and, in a close engagement fought at pistol range, that arithmetic was frequently decisive. The cannon's reign ended the same way it began, not because the iron changed, but because the world around it did. Iron hulls removed the only target it had ever truly needed. 400 years, and the decisive variable was never the iron. It was the 90 seconds. If you want the next chapter, how the Dreadnought rewrote every lesson the cannon spent 4 centuries teaching, subscribe and it will find you. See you there.